Hello and welcome to episode number 12 of The Terror Cellar. I'm Andy Crofts and today I have two amazing stories for you which you're going to love. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the support I'm getting on the internet, mainly because that's where we all talk these days, right? But I just wanted to say thank you because it's hard when you start something like a new podcast because you've got to start from scratch and slowly reach out there to try and attract people's attention, you know, and especially being in a niche, you know, like of a paranormal world, you know, it's not so commercial. So just wanted to say thank you for, if you're a regular and you keep coming back to listen to more, thank you very much. And remember to keep telling your friends and spreading the word for me because it'll really help out. But I don't want to keep you any longer. I've got two amazing stories, okay? So we're going to get started right now. So you know what to do. Sit back, dim the lights, and put your headphones on. And get ready for episode number 1, called Deadline. I was 14 years old when this happened. My father was the kind of man who was constantly on the move. His job took him all over the world, and to me, it felt like he was always jetting off to some far-flung destination. Despite being so busy, he was the kindest, most reliable person I knew. No matter where he was in the world, he always kept his promises, especially one to call us the moment he landed, just to say he was safe and to check in. Because of these regular calls, we never felt like he was too far away. He always found a way to connect, but being a fast-paced businessman came with its tolls. My dad had heart issues, something I think the constant stress and pressure of the work only made worse. Back then though, he never let us see it. He always put on a brave face, hiding his struggles behind a smile and shielding us from his worries. One evening, just before he was set to leave for another trip, we ended up sitting on the porch together. It was one of those nights where the conversation just flows, and for hours we talked about things that don't usually come up. Somehow we ended up talking about the afterlife and the paranormal. At first we laughed about it, but then the conversation turned serious. We made a pact. Whoever passed away first would try their best to send a sign from the other side. We kind of joked about it, but deep down, I could tell we both meant it. When the night finally wound up, we hugged and said goodnight. He had to be up early for the flight the next morning. The next day started just like any other. He was rushing around the house, toast in one hand and attempting to fix his tie with the other. It was just past 7 a.m. and everything was hectic as usual. I managed to catch him in time to give him a hug and say goodbye. As he opened the door to leave, he looked back at me and gave me one of his signature winks. "I'll call you when I land," he said, with a smile. His flight was a long one, and he was supposed to land around 8 p.m. That night, we were all in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner. The radio was playing softly in the background, sitting in its usual spot by the sink. I was washing up, my hands in soapy water, and my mind was wandering. That's when it happened. The radio, which had been on all day, started making these strange noises. At first, it was just static. But then I thought I heard a voice. A man's voice. It was faint and garbled, like it was buried under the interference. I couldn't make out what it was saying, so I shrugged it off, thinking it was just some kind of radio interference. Then, the phone rang. It was one of those old rotary phones mounted to the wall, and the sudden ringing made me jump. I dried my hands quickly and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I said, but there was no reply. Just silence. Then suddenly a loud burst of static blasted through the handset. Startled, I pulled it away from my ear. When I put it back, I could hear something faint. So faint I almost missed it. It was my name, Marnie. My heart stopped. Dad? Is that you? I asked. But the static grew louder and then the line went dead. I stood there confused. If it was my dad, I thought he'd call back. And surely enough, the phone rang again. I rushed to answer it, hoping to hear his voice, but this time it wasn't him. It was the police. They asked to speak to my mother. I handed her the phone and I'll never forget the look on her face as she listened. Her expression changed instantly. Her face drained of colour and then the tears started. She cried out, holding the phone tightly, and in that moment, I knew something terrible had happened. Through her sobs, I overheard enough to piece it together. My dad had suffered a fatal heart attack during the flight. He was pronounced dead on arrival. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't cry, and I couldn't speak. The news didn't feel real. It was like I was watching everything happen to someone else. As my mum cried hysterically, I stood frozen. I heard it again. The static from the radio. The same sound, and then the phone rang for a third time. I picked it up, my heart racing, desperate for it to be him. "Hello?" I said. My voice was trembling and I could barely hold the phone. All I heard was the same white noise as before, but then, faintly, just barely audible, I heard it. "Marnie? Marnie?" It was his voice. I know it was. It was distant, like it was coming from far, far away. And then, just like that, it stopped. In the days that followed, everything felt like a blur. It wasn't until later, when the shock began to wear off, that I realised what had really happened. The static on the radio and the strange phone calls, they weren't random. They could have been, but I believe it was my dad, keeping his promise, reaching out one last time to let me know he was okay. Even now, years later, I find comfort in that thought. Losing him so suddenly was devastating, and I still haven't fully healed from it. But knowing that he tried to connect with me, to let me know he had landed safely, even if it was on the other side, brings me a sense of peace. Thank you, Marnie, for sending in that great little story. Wow, what a story. I mean, spirits are known for using some sort of white noise to connect to our side. And I find it amazing that he kept trying to contact you. He started with the radio. He tried with the radio, and then he used his energy to call you. I mean, that's amazing. And if it was him, like you said, it could have been a coincidence. But if it was him, I like to think it was. He kept his promise. He called you just that one final time to let you know he was safe, wherever he was in a different dimension. And now for story number 2, the Poltergeist. My house was one of those old, creaky American wooden homes that seemed to groan with every breeze. At first, the constant noises, floorboards shifting, walls cracking and stairs creaking were unnerving, but after living there for a few years, the sounds just faded into the background, blended into the fabric of everyday life. It was a big house, mostly modernised with bright updated rooms that felt warm and safe. But there was one exception, the attic. The attic was the untouched heart of the house, looming above us like a forgotten relic. It was massive, stretching across the entire size of the home, and its purpose was simple: storage. Over the years, it had become a dumping ground for everything we didn't need but couldn't part with. Old furniture, broken toys, clothes on sagging rails, and countless dusty boxes stacked like forgotten memories. The space was cold, damp and heavy with the smell of aged wood and mildew. I hated the attic. There was something oppressive about it, something that felt alive. I always told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by all those horror movies where attics are the epicenter of the terror. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something waiting. It started small, but subtle enough that I couldn't brush it off. My bedroom, which was directly beneath the attic, became a focal point for strange happenings. At first it was things being moved, drawers left wide open when I swore I'd closed them, or items that I distinctly remembered placing somewhere turning up in odd places. One night, I woke up to the sound of a loud thud. In the morning, I found one of my framed pictures had fallen, the glass shattered. I tried to rationalise it. Maybe the frame was unsteady, or maybe I was just forgetful. But then the activity started escalating. I'd come into my room to find the light fixture swinging, as if someone had pushed it. Not gently either. It would be swinging violently back and forth. Sometimes my bed covers would be ripped off and thrown into a heap on the floor. Once I found every drawer in my room pulled open, their contents spilling out like someone had been searching for something. My parents swore they hadn't touched a thing. The scariest part wasn't what I saw, but what I felt. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. It felt deliberate and focused on me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, my skin crawling as though I was being watched. I could feel it, something hovering just beyond my reach, waiting for me to fall back asleep. One night, I heard the sound of footsteps above me in the attic. Slow, deliberate steps that moved back and forth across the creaky floorboards. It wasn't the usual house noises. These were heavy, purposeful, like someone or something was pacing. My blood ran cold. I lay frozen in bed, unable to breathe, praying it would stop. It didn't. The noises became a nightly occurrence. Scratches, bangs, even guttural groans that seemed to seep through the ceiling. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but the pacing footsteps made it impossible to believe that. I'd lie awake for hours, paralysed with fear, listening as it stomped above me. Then, the activity shifted. It came back into my room, and this time, it was more aggressive. I'd wake up with bruises on my arms and legs, strange marks I couldn't explain. One morning I discovered 3 long thin scratches on my back, too deep to be from my nails. Another time I felt something cold and sharp graze my cheek in the dark, as if someone had dragged a nail across my face. The worst was the physical touch. I'd feel gusts of icy air sweep over me, tugging at my hair or pulling at my toes while I lay in bed. It wasn't subtle, it was forceful, angry as if it wanted me to know it was there. One night I woke up gasping for air, feeling invisible hands pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, only stare into the pitch black as I fought to breathe. Even my wooden floor wasn't spared. Deep marks appeared one morning, long scratches carved into the boards near my bed. It looked like someone or something had raked claws across the floor. My parents finally noticed how this was affecting me. I was exhausted, terrified and falling apart. I barely slept and my grades at school began to plummet. My mum decided it was time to take action. Being deeply religious, she called a priest to bless the house. I remember sitting with him as he prayed over me, sprinkling holy water and reciting passages meant to drive away whatever darkness had taken hold. it didn't help. If anything, the blessing seemed to make things worse. The energy in the house grew darker, angrier, as though it had been provoked. The noises in the attic became deafening, like furniture being dragged across the floor or boxes being thrown against the walls. I could feel it, whatever it was, looming over me, suffocating me. The attacks grew more intense. I'd wake up to find my hair tangled as if someone had been pulling at it whilst I was asleep. Sometimes I'd hear faint whispers in the middle of the night. My name, spoken in a voice that wasn't quite human. Eventually I couldn't stay in my bedroom anymore. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, desperate for any sense of safety. But even then, I couldn't escape the nightmares. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, haunted by the feeling that it was still with me. My parents couldn't ignore it any longer, and they decided to sell the house. Leaving that place felt like shedding a heavy weight. Once we were gone, the darkness lifted. I started sleeping again, my bruises healed, and my life slowly returned to normal. But I've never forgotten what happened in that house. I've told a few friends over the years, but they never believe me. They laugh it off, saying it's just my imagination. But I know the truth. That house was evil. Something dark lived there. Something that fed on fear and pain. Whoever lives there now, I don't envy them. I can only hope they are luckier than I was. But deep down, I know it's still there, waiting and watching. Thank you, Jenny Wright, for sending in that story. Well, I guess it is the classic Poltergeist, isn't it? I mean, we all know poltergeists are what they do. You know, they move objects and, you know, things around the house, basically, that kind of thing. But when it starts to become physical, now that's a different story, because there's something demonic going on there, and there's something trying to hurt you, trying to physically hurt you, and even leave marks on the floor. You know, it's obviously a dark spirit of some kind that's not happy with you. So you did the right thing getting out the house, and I'd love to know if anything ever happened to the next people that moved in. But anyway, we're at the end of the show now, so thank you very much for listening to episode number 12 of The Terror Cellar. And remember, I would love your stories, however short or long. You know, keep them coming to me. Strange, paranormal, creepy, horror, supernatural. Just try and keep it real, okay, if you send it to me. Personal experiences are the best, all right? So send them over to me at theterrorcellarpodcast@gmail.com and have it featured on the show. How about that? So, yeah, thank you very much for listening in. Please don't forget to rate the show for me on whatever platform you're listening to. Rate the show and review it, because it will really help the show get further out there to more people. Okay, so thank you. But anyway, it's time for me to check out, and don't have nightmares. Bye bye.